Hey everyone, welcome back to part 6 of the Covalence walkthrough for building a Reddit client using Next.js and Tailwind. Today we're going to be adding a dark mode feature to the app with a little toggle action for being able to toggle back and forth between dark and light mode, as well as a window match media query to allow us to actually match the system default on page load or initial page load. So please, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button below. Otherwise, we're about to get started. Let's go. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we actually need to open up our Tailwind config file, and right under content, we're going to add this little dark mode preference called class. They have class and media. I prefer using the class because I'll do a little trick with a media selection to kind of designate whether or not we want to default to dark mode or not. But class is basically just saying that anything that you put the dark mode class on, all of its children will switch over to satisfying the dark mode conditions, right? And so if you have any dark mode classes on in those children, then it will switch over to that style. So let's go ahead and open up our index.tsx pages, and we are going to first, we're going to have to actually determine how we're going to, designate this dark mode, right? And so what we can do is that we can create a state variable here. So we'll say dark and set dark and equals useState, and by default we will say false, right? And we may be able to change this a little bit later using this media query, but I'll show you guys how to do that in a bit. All right, so and then we'll also want to know. Well, let's just start there, and we'll kind of start placing our dark classes on things. So let's just say down here where we have BG Gray 100, let's also designate a dark mode background, so BG Gray 800, and we'll say by default we want the text to be white, right? All right, and then also what we can do is kind of show off how this works. So let's open up a terminal and we'll npm run dev. And so when we actually pull this up, it's thinking, there we go. We'll open up our DOM, and we just changed the actual background here, right? So we can see that we have dark BG Gray 800 on here and dark text white. And here's our parent container. And so if we go ahead and we add the dark class, we can see that it actually changes here, right? And we can see that the actual footer, the text is now white. So everything looks pretty good. Obviously this is still dark gray, so we're gonna have to change that. We're gonna change the header or the footer, sorry, the nav bar color. We'll change this as well, and then we're actually gonna have to add a button to toggle between light and dark mode. So let's go back to our code here. We'll leave this running. We'll just make it a little bit smaller. And we're going to have to kind of change this because we want it to toggle. And we'll leave styles.container on there, but then we'll also say if is dark, or sorry, just dark, then we'll say add the dark class, else we'll just say light. We'll just put that light in there just to show that in the DOM we'll be able to see between light and dark. And if we're going to add this to the nav bar, we're gonna need a function. But let's first just jump into the components themselves. Let's style the list, the components, all of that. Let's see, we can add some hover effects to these the links right here that go next and previous. So let's just say by default we want to hover, let's see here, we'll hover text gray 900, but then we'll dark hover text gray 300. Okay, so we want to copy this, and then we're going to add it to here as well. All right, so the dark prefix, basically anything that's after the dark prefix will only apply during dark mode, and then so even effects like hover will also respect that prefix as well. So let's go ahead and save that. And then we are going to get into our components real quick. Let's see the footer class here. We're going to, by default, we have BG white, but then let's add our dark prefix and say BG black. And then I know that it actually was already respecting the upper or the parent text white, but instead of allowing it to inherit, we wanted to like just set it by default just in case later on we decide to change that, and we don't want our footer to also fall victim to that if we want that text to be white. So I always think it's better to explicitly state that we want the footer to contain the dark text white. All right, so now we have our list. Let's go ahead and open that. And we can go ahead and jump into each card itself. So let's say dark border gray 700. We also want to actually change it on hover. So dark hover border gray 300, make the border a little bit lighter. And again, let's change the actual background color, which by default is white, but then let's also explicitly state that the text itself is going to be white. And then we'll actually have to change, because we have text gray 900 here on the title, we'll say dark text white. All right, that should be good for the list. Now let's jump into our nav bar here, and we will say that the BG white will change to BG black, similar to the footer. And then let's see, the input itself, we can change the background to 800, sounds pretty good, keeping things consistent, right? Text white. Change the border color, border gray 900. And also, when we focus the text as well, we want it to be white. So we don't want the focus text to be a different color. So we want that to stay consistent. And we'll also need to add our switch in here. So let's go ahead and what can we do? Let's cancel this real quick. Let's test it. Rerun everything. We're going to reload the page, and we're going to add, instead of light, we're going to change this to dark just to make sure that it looks good. All right, and we have our logo up here that we need to change as well. But everything else seems to be looking pretty good. This looks good. And now we have some hover effects on here. The text in the footer looks good. All right, so we need to change the logo, and we also need to actually add a switch in here. So let's go ahead and end this real quick. And we're going to use a package that plays really well with React. It's called Headless UI. So npm I headless UI / React -- save. All right, let's pull up. Let's see, did I type? Oh, I typed in a Y here for some reason. All right, so disregard this error. For some reason, I don't know why I must have typed a Y by accident, but as you can see, it added one package. We have some vulnerabilities in here, but again, we can fix those later. It's probably not anything serious, but let's check our package.json real quick. It looks like we got the headless UI / React, so we should be good. So let's go back to our nav bar, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to import, I'm going to change this around. I kind of like having things in a particular order. That's personal preference, but actually before our React, we're going to import from @headless UI / React. Forgot the first. There we go. And it's called a switch. So we're going to import switch, and we are going to add a little area for this. So let's see, underneath this div, we're going to have another div, and we'll make it flex. What else can we do here? We'll add a little bit of left, let's say item center, whoops, flex item center. and we'll add a little bit of margin just to keep things pushed over. And then we'll add our switch. And inside of our switch, we need to basically say checked, but we need a state for this as well, right? So we need the actual state itself. So in addition to search, we'll say is dark and set is dark. Oops, we'll say false by default. And down here, we'll say is dark is the check state. We'll have an on theme changed function. So what we're actually going to have to do is we're going to want to pass in props down here, right? So before we actually continue with the switch, let's add some props to navbar because we're going to actually want to pass in the default theme as well. So dark boolean and on theme change, right? So we want to be able to pass back to the body or the index that the theme is actually changed. So we'll say dark boolean, and it doesn't need to return anything. And in here, we'll say this is dark and on theme changed, and this is iProps. And then what we can do is we can change that to be dark, right? So our is dark by default is the dark passed into the navbar. And on theme changed, instead of actually putting it here, so on change equals, instead of actually making this on theme changed, we want to actually set the dark value in here as well. So we can create a new, just say theme changed, and we'll say this is a value which is a boolean, and we'll say set is dark val, and we'll say on theme changed val as well. And then our theme changed, let's give us some room here, that error is ugly. Theme change can go in here. So we'll also need some class names, but now our index is throwing an error because we added props here. So let's go back and fix this real quick. And we can see navbar obviously isn't passing any props. So we want to pass in dark, and that's just dark. And then on theme change, we need a new function for this. And let's just create an on theme changed function. So const on theme changed. Or I mean, we could just call it, let's just call it theme changed. And this will be our val, which is a boolean. And we're going to set dark val equals true. All right, so that should be good. And then theme change could be what we passed into on theme changed here. All right. So now our navbar has everything. We have no more errors. We can go ahead and save all our files, go back to our navbar, and down here we can start adding some classes, right? So class name, and we can have probably a pretty big list of class names down here. Let's see. Well, we're actually gonna have to change based off of whether or not there's dark or not. So let's go ahead and account for that. So let's see, relative, I want to give it some height, width. I've played with this switch before, so I kind of know what the height and width would need to be to make it look good. Border 2 pixels, border transparent, gives it a little bit of like cushioning in there, makes it look good. Rounded full, cursor pointer to make sure that when you're on desktop, it actually gives you the pointer so it looks like you can click it well. We're going to let it transition the colors, and we're going to make that transition timing function ease in and out. We're going to set the duration to 200 milliseconds, and then we don't want there to be an outline when there's a focus, so we'll say focus outline none. Focus, we do want to give it a ring of 2 pixels, and we want to give the ring offset basically we wanted to give it a little bit of, push the ring out a little bit, right? So focus ring offset 2. And then also we want to make that ring a color. So let's use indigo. I think that indigo color is pretty cool. Pretty standard too. And then also, I think we have text center somewhere in here. Let's see. Or by default, I think we have it as text center in the index. So let's go ahead and just to make sure, we have to actually, oh, not text white, sorry, text left, right? We have to actually have what's inside of this pushed all the way to the left. We don't want it to be centered because we're going to be translating it back and forth. And then if is dark, we want to have the background be indigo. Else we want the background to be BG gray 200. All right, so that should be good. Now we want to actually add, actually before we do anything, let's account for screen readers. So this is good practice if you're building something that might be used and needs accessibility. So SR only makes it for screen readers only. And what we can say is if is dark, we're going to say light mode, else we're going to say dark mode, right? Because basically what we're saying that if we're already in dark mode, we want the button to be for light mode, right? And if we're in light mode, we want the button to be dark mode, right? We want it to basically say for a screen reader that this is going to turn it into dark mode. All right. Not that you would actually need this for light and dark because, you know, if somebody was screen reading, they may not be able to see it, but contrast purposes, why not? We'll do it just in case you need, you know, just to showcase what the screen reader only would do and the fact that it isn't going to show up in the DOM, right? All right, so let's go ahead, add a span. Now this span is actually going to be our little button in the center. So we'll say class name. We're going to have a difference between is dark and not is dark. So let's add pointer events none, relative positioning, inline block, h5 and width 5 because it's going to be a circle. So we have to do round and full. Let's say BG white, but in dark mode we want it to be BG black, right? And with dark mode, we also want the text to be a different color as well. So text gray 100. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to put like a little sun and moon icon in here. So let's see, shadow. We want it to actually have a transform here. Ring 0. Let's give it a transition here with an ease in and out timing function. A duration of 200 milliseconds. And if is dark, we're going to say we want to translate it over 5 in the X direction. Otherwise, we're just going to have it not translated at all, right? So translate X0. All right, and that should be good for that. Let's see. And then also, let's say for this, we can make sure that the screen reader doesn't actually read this thing. So we'll say are hidden true. And inside this span is where we actually want to put our icons. So we already have icons. We don't have anything imported in here yet, but we can actually add our hero icons in here. So we're going to import from at hero icons /react/solid. And we're going to import a moon icon and a sun icon. All right, so let's go back down here. And so what we'll do here is we'll say, this is actually going to be the moon icon, right? So we'll put our first span and add a class name, and we'll say absolute, inset 0, h full, and w full, a flex item center. We want the icon to be right in the center. Justify center. we're going to transition opacity because we're going to show one and then hide the other based on that. And then let's see, transition opacity. So I guess we can say this is where we actually want the class name to be different depending on whether or not it is dark or not. And so we'll add in here if it is dark. We can say, let's see, if it is dark, we need opacity to be 0 if we're going to do the moon icon. Ease out duration 100. Else, let's say opacity 100. Ease in and duration 200. That'll provide a pretty cool little effect. We can copy our aria hidden in here, aria hidden true. And then inside this span is where we actually want our moon icon. And let's make sure we give it a class name. So we want h6w6. And we'll copy again aria hidden true here. And then what we can do is now we can just kind of copy this entire span. Except we're going to change this to be sun icon. And we have to swap these. So let's go ahead and pull this out. And we're swapping the position there. So so now one is going to be shown and one is going to be hidden. Perfect. I believe we did this right. Yep, is dark. The opacity is 0 on the moon icon, right? Because we want to show the sun icon. And then if is dark, the opacity is 100 on the sun icon. So that, yep. So now that'll be clicking that, we'll turn it back into light mode. And here, clicking it with the moon icon shown, will turn it into dark mode. All right, so save that. And that should be everything, right? We have our theme changed, that fires, it sets is dark, and it also fires on theme changed in our index. And in our index, that'll fire our theme change, which sets dark, which then changes this as the dark class, which should propagate down into all the children and turn everything into dark mode. So npm run dev, hopefully everything's going to work. Go ahead, reload the page. We have our switch. We click it. It has a cool little effect, turns everything into dark mode, back to light mode. And we forgot our icon. So let's go back. Let's do the icon real quick. That's in our nav bar. So let's grab that. And what we can do is the image itself, we're going to turn the source like this is dark. We're going to say it's something different. Otherwise, it is the light image. And I actually have a separate light image here that we're going to have to add to our project. So we're going to go into public logos. We have subreddit. We are going to copy this subreddit light into here. So we have the dark and we have the light. All right, you guys can grab these icons from the GitHub repo themselves. So we want to basically paste the same thing in here, but instead of subreddit, it is now subreddit light. Save that. Let's go ahead and pull this back up. Refresh. Probably don't have to refresh, but just in case. Bam. All right, now we got a different icon in there, dark versus light. Awesome. Make sure that we have our white text in there. Looks good. Turn it back. Black text. Go back. Bam. It looks good to me. All right, now one last thing that we can do is we can actually add a media matching function, right? So if by default the default, I guess, theme of the system itself is dark mode, then we want to actually start in dark mode, right? So the way that we can do this is we can go back into our list, and this is going to be kind of hard to showcase how it works. You'd actually have to pull this up on your phone, but we will add this code and we will pull it up on an iPhone that is in dark mode to make sure this works when we deploy. And so we're going to set it up now, and then we're going to test it in the next part. So let's open up our index here, and we're actually going to use effect, and we're going to do it right after here. So we'll say use effect. We're only going to run this once. I'm going to say there's no dependencies. And basically how we're going to do this is we're going to say if, let's say if not, we want to check window itself, right? So if not is object window, or not window dot match media is a function on window, and what we want to check for is prefers color scheme dark, dot matches. So if not is object window, or this doesn't exist, we simply return. Otherwise, we just set dark to true. All right, so now if the media matches prefers color scheme dark, then we're going to set dark to true, and that should by default allow us to start with our app in dark mode. All right, and that's one way to do it. Now, this isn't going to change anything because, unfortunately, I'm on a Windows computer right now that is not in dark mode, but if we had a Mac and we had it in dark mode, it should actually showcase that, and we're going to pull it up on an iPhone during the next part after we deploy it, just to make sure that this is working correctly. And that's it for this part, guys. I hope you had fun, and I'll see you next time. All right, so hope you all enjoyed that. It's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. We're going to have one more part coming up next. It's going to be deployment. So again, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, subscribe below so you get the latest notifications from us and from what we're doing. And if you have any suggestions for future content, please let us know in the comments. All right, everyone. See you next time.